I want to revisit the subject of Alpha Cucks that I was on a couple of days ago. Fundamentally, I think the issue with a lot of these guys is they think of, the duty to protect women's safety and the duty to protect women's freedom as being the one and the same, or different aspects of the same duty or impulse, when in fact they are actually opposed. There's a fundamental trade-off between freedom and safety. Even at its most basic, the freedom to succeed, that comes with the freedom to fail. The opportunity to succeed comes with the opportunity to fail. But people can use freedom in even more risky and dangerous ways, such as by hiking alone in the mountains of Morocco, or trying to hitchhike to the West Bank, or even just going out alone on the town and getting plastered, blackout drunk. These are all very irresponsible and risky decisions that somebody can use freedom to make, and demonstrably that some people do use freedom to make. So protecting women's safety and protecting women's freedom are two very different and often contradictory things. And you can't really do both to any great degree. You kind of have to do one or the other. We can't have a man following every woman around to protect her from the consequences of her own decisions. We have other stuff to do. And so you have to trade off those values of freedom versus safety. And men and women make those trade-offs differently. Freedom comes with responsibility, because your choices have consequences, but that responsibility comes with risk, because those consequences can be bad. So, it might make more sense to allow men to take those risks and to learn how to succeed and how not to fail, because in those cases, the risk is something that men are willing to take. Men are less risk averse and also more able to take. And, in many ways, men can't afford not to take risks and succeed and distinguish themselves, because that's how a man makes a name for himself, right? Women have a certain amount of value, just by virtue of existing and having, the reproductive potential that they do. They are the bottleneck in human reproduction, and that gives them a certain amount of inherent value that men don't lack. Men have to distinguish themselves and make a name for themselves and succeed, and that necessarily entails risk. So men can't afford not to take those risks, and men can afford to take those risks, or let's say evolution can afford to take those risks with males, because males are the more expendable sex in biological terms. Males are not the bottleneck in human reproduction. So in that sense, are individually and collectively more expendable than women. And that's why men are less risk averse and more risk taking. So, that's our evolutionary function. It has upsides, obviously. It has downsides, obviously. Feminists look at the upsides. They want the payoffs. They want the rewards. But they don't want the risks, they don't want the costs. And so their demands are fundamentally unreasonable and unrealistic and irrational, because you can't have the one without the other. And they don't really want the risks, they don't really want the costs. That much is obvious. And it's obvious from, what women vote for when we give them that freedom, right? When we give women freedom, one of the first things they do is immediately start taking it away. Not only from themselves and each other, but from men as well. Women support social spending and social safety nets more than men do. They want to eliminate the downside risk of personal failure by enacting these social safety nets, but that costs money. And that has to be taken from the people who succeed. And so that eliminates or reduces the payoff of success. So, in order to avoid the risks of failure, the costs of failure, women support removing the opportunity to succeed to a certain extent, at least. And women vote for gun control. This is just a pure risk aversion thing. Makes sense in potentially makes sense in terms of risk aversion, because it is a potential source of risk. And I'm not going to get into the weeds of whether it would make us more safe or less safe, because you can go either way on that. And it's kind of hard to untangle the causality. There's a lot of factors there. But one thing that's certain is women support gun control because of perceived possibility of risk reduction. And that's not totally insane. Men oppose gun control because widely distributed implements of conflict, guns, weapons, help to keep sovereignty distributed. Guns are tied up with sovereignty, and that's something that's important, maybe more important than safety in a lot of cases. And that's why men oppose gun control. But women support it from risk aversion and from a safety standpoint. It's not necessary to get down in the weeds of whether they're right or wrong about that. That's why they support it. And fundamentally why men oppose gun control doesn't have to do with safety. It has to do with sovereignty and preserving the means of wielding and maintaining and exercising sovereignty, which is more important to men than mere safety. And then, women support safety regulations of all different kinds, including drug and alcohol prohibition. They support more than men. Regulation of drugs and alcohol and all this stuff. MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. All of this has to do with, safety seeking and risk aversion. And so, if we want to have any freedom as men, if we want to have any fun, then we can't be giving freedom to women, because they're going to try to take ours away as well as their own. So that's there's a conflict there. But men and women make these trade-offs differently, and so that suggests a solution, obviously, which is to give men more freedom and women more safety. Like, we can tailor different policies for men and women. And that's part of what gender roles are about, is having different roles and different responsibilities and different rules for men and women that optimize the respective trade-offs that they make in the ways that they make them. You want to give men the freedom to succeed and the opportunity to succeed, right? Some of them are going to fail, but they're men, so they take their failure individually to the grave. Society still gets to derive benefits, and women still get to derive benefits from the successes. And for women, shield them from a lot more risk, but that necessarily entails curtailing their freedom. So, there's a fundamental trade-off there between safety and freedom, and men and women seek to make those trade-offs differently. So instead of making them the same way across the board for men and women, such as by making women live by men's rules, or giving women the vote so that they can make men live by feminine sensibilities, that makes no sense. So a division of roles and responsibilities and rules makes more sense. That's what gender roles are all about. So this this alpha cuckery position of conflating the protection of women's safety with the protection of women's freedom, when those two things are opposed, that doesn't make any sense. So let's move past that, back to gender roles. We can make these trade-offs in different ways for different groups of people with different preferences and different evolutionary biological roles to fill. Like, subscribe, support, links are all below. Thanks for tuning in.